Hello, everybody. And I'm not entirely sure how to open up the show with whether or not I just say, welcome back to the Lazy Girl's Guide to Podcasting, or whether or not to say, welcome to Podcasting for Indie Podcasters, because you may have noticed that the podcast has rebranded. I have created a completely new brand for the podcast, and we are renaming it. So hello, I'm Verity. Forgot to introduce myself there. That was a bit of a faux pas at the beginning of an episode. But hello, I'm Verity, and welcome to Podcasting for Indie Podcasters. I wanted to have this episode to just have a chat with you about rebranding the podcast, why I've done it, and how you can also go through your own rebrand if you feel that that is relevant for you. So first of all, why have I rebranded? Okay, so Lazy Girl's Guide to Podcasting has been around since 2023. So we've been going just over 2 years at this point, something like that. Yeah, so it has to be because we're in 2026 now. So podcast's been going about 2.5 years, something like that, which is absolutely incredible. We've done over 100 episodes. We've got thousands of listeners around the world. It never ceases to amaze me whenever I look at podcast analytics, the countries that people listen to this show from. And I absolutely love that. So thank you so much wherever in the world you are listening from. Especially, I have realized in the last couple of months, the city with the biggest listenership is Los Angeles, which is incredible. I've never been to LA. I would love to go to LA. I'm watching Selling Sunset at the moment, so I'm really getting the California vibes. Watch Selling the OC before that. I hope you don't end up judging me knowing what I watch on TV now. But the point is, I would love to go to LA, and I love that the city with the biggest listenership for this podcast at the moment is Los Angeles. I think that's really, really cool. But regardless of where you are in the world, I really, really appreciate you tuning in and listening to the podcast. You really make this show what it is. I love the emails saying how this show has helped other people with their podcast and giving people the confidence and the tools that they need in order to develop their own podcast and show. So thank you so much for that. But as I was saying, the show's been going about 2.5-ish years at this point. And when I set up the Lazy Girl Guide to Podcasting, I had this idea that I knew what I wanted the podcast to be about, i.e. podcasting about podcasting, but I had no idea what to name it. And I think I mentioned on an earlier episode of the show that I did have a conversation with somebody, and she had been saying to me, I really want to start a podcast. I essentially just need the Lazy Girl's Guide for it. And I was like, bam, that's it. That is the name of the podcast, Lazy Girl's Guide to Podcasting. And in 2023, that totally worked. Loved the name of the podcast. I have done for a long time, but in the last couple of months, I've just been having a lot of thoughts to myself as to whether or not calling it Lazy Girl's Guide to Podcasting was the right thing for the show. And I had a few different reasons around this. First of all, Lazy Girl, I wasn't sure whether or not it was giving the right vibes. I'm going to be completely honest with you, because I think that, first of all, people who listen to the show are not lazy in the slightest. And I don't think any of them would identify as being a girl, because this audience is adults, primarily females. We do have a male audience as well. I'll come on to that in a minute. But I wasn't sure whether or not Lazy Girl was actually giving the right vibe to the podcast, because nobody who listens to the show, as I said, is lazy at all. If you run a podcast, you are definitely not lazy, because you're probably doing it all by yourself. And there's a lot that goes into doing a podcast or being a podcaster. So I just wasn't sure whether or not having the word lazy in there was the right thing to do. I also wasn't sure whether or not having the word girl in there, didn't know whether or not it was, I don't know, you might completely disagree with me, but I wasn't sure whether or not it was a bit derogatory, considering it's women that tend to listen to this podcast and not girls. And I don't know, there were so many question marks around it. Also, on the flip side of that, I've also got a male audience to this podcast. And again, I wasn't sure whether or not calling it Lazy Girl was actually then relevant to the male audience. I don't know. I just ended up with a lot of questions. I think there's also been a lot in the news recently about VAWg, which is violence against women and girls. There's been a lot of conversation, I think, publicly around VAWg microaggressions as well. And I wasn't sure whether or not, well, it's not being not sure. I wasn't sure if there was a conversation really to be had around whether or not the whole Lazy Girl thing actually fed into a VAWg microaggression. I don't know. Maybe I'm really overthinking it, but you get my point. I've just been having a lot of thoughts in my head that I didn't think that Lazy Girl Guide to Podcasting was fitting the show's ethos anymore. Also, I'm hosting a show. I don't identify as being a lazy girl. So if I don't identify as being a lazy girl, why should I be calling my own show that? I don't know. Like I said, I have a lot of questions. So I've gone through this entire process of really thinking, what should I be calling the show? Thinking about where my audience is at, who is it that I'm targeting, who listens to the show, what do people need from the show, etc. And I kept coming back to the point that I wanted the word podcasting in the title. I wanted it right near the beginning because from an SEO search point of view, I wanted people to be searching podcasting and it just being really bloody obvious what the podcast is about. And then I was really wanting something as well that qualified people to be looking at the title of the show and thinking, yes, this show is definitely for me. So podcasting, and then it's for indie podcasters. Was I 100% happy with the fact that I had podcasting and podcasters in the title? No, not 100%, but I went back and forth with quite a few different titles. I looked at the indie guide to podcasting and the podcaster's guide for indie creators. I looked at loads of different things, but I kept coming back to podcasting for indie podcasters. And I was like, do you know what? If I keep coming back to that, let's just land on that. If it's still that in a year's time, great. If I change it, then whatever, it's work in progress. And, it's just about continually evolving, really, isn't it? And just considering to myself, where is the show at in the moment and what's relevant for the show, what's relevant for me. So the podcast has officially been rebranded to Podcasting for Indie Podcasters. I then looked at the colouring. You'll notice that the colours have changed a little bit as well. Not too much, but it's a bit more jumpy outy. When you're looking at it in the search, image is exactly the same when you look at the podcast artwork. And then the other thing that I've done as part of this rebrand is I've really overhauled my website. This has taken me what feels like ages. It's been a great project. I love website building. I've been building websites since front page was a thing. And if anyone knows front page, then probably showing your age a little bit, and I'm probably giving away how old I am as well. I've written blogs for over 7 years now at this stage. This is my longest running blog, the one that I've got with all of the podcast information on it. It's at veritysongon.com at the moment. I'm considering whether or not I switch that over or whether or not I just leave the URL as it is, because if we switch the URL, that creates its own host of issues in terms of redirect, but we will wait and see. But what I was doing was I went through all of the blog posts on there, all 140 odd, there's so many on there, and I'm in this process of updating so many because I've got so much content on there from 2023, 2024, and it's all really relevant, but my blogging skills have evolved, my podcasting skills have evolved, so I'm going through and updating well over 100 blog posts, finishing writing out a load of draft ones as well, and creating loads of podcast episodes for blog posts, which I had the information there as a blog post, but I didn't have a podcast episode that went with it. So I was like, well, I'm kind of doing myself a disservice here by trying to create content and coming up with content ideas when actually I've got blog posts that need podcast episodes that can go with them. So that's where I'm going with that. So website has been completely overhauled. I absolutely love it. There's still work in progress, but I'd love it if you wanted to go over and check it out and let me know your feedback on it. But yeah, I'm really, really loving the website as it is. And I think that's going to be my real thing that I focus on. 2024 was the year where I really focused on building up the newsletter. 2025, that lay by the roadside slightly, but I'm back on track with that now. And 2026 is going to be the year where we really, really pick up the blog to go alongside the podcast. So the main things I think that I want to kind of convey across in this podcast episode, because I always like to give you takeaway points for the show so that it's useful for you. And if you are thinking about rebranding your show, what I would recommend is, first of all, consider to yourself, why is it that you want to rebrand? Is it that something's just feeling off, or is it that you're bored with the show? Like, what is it? You're bored with the show title, whatever. What is it that's making you want to rebrand? Second, remember that it's not just about colors. A lot of people seem to think that rebranding just means shoving a few new colors on something, and it's not. It's what those colors convey. Are they cohesive? What feelings and emotions do those colors convey as well? The next thing is about the actual title of your show and your tagline, making sure that there are keywords, searchable keywords within that tagline and title as well. And it's not just about the keywords you think that your audience are searching for, but what is it that they are actually searching for? The fourth thing is, don't rush the process. As I said, I've gone backwards and forwards many, many times on particularly the name of the podcast when it comes to rebranding it. So don't be afraid to spend a bit of time, go back and forth, and don't be worried to experiment, sit with something for a few hours or a few days and think, not too sure what I think about that. If you have a title, go across to Canva or Adobe, whatever it is you use to create your artwork, and actually make up some mock-ups, because you might find that actually you've rested on a title, but when you start mocking it up, it doesn't look right. Like the weighting of the words doesn't look right. And also finally, before you go forward with a rebrand, make sure that you are happy with it because it's your podcast at the end of the day. Make sure that everything is cohesive across all of those different platforms that you're using. So if you've got a social media presence, if you've got a newsletter, if you've got a website, just make sure there's cohesion so that people don't turn up on one and think that they're in completely the wrong place for something else. Oh, and actually, finally, tell people about your rebrand. So as I'm doing this episode right now and telling everybody that the podcast is no longer called Lazy Girl's Guide to Podcasting and it is now Podcasting for Indie Podcasters, make sure that you are telling people so that people are aware of that change as well, and ask for feedback. So I'd love it when I send out the newsletter blast for this episode, let me know what you think of the rebrand. I would really like to know whether or not it resonates with you, if you think it was a waste of time, if you thought it was a good idea, whatever your thought, I would genuinely love to know. So as ever, thank you so much for being here for this podcast episode with me. If you are not already subscribed to the podcast, make sure you hit the subscribe button on whichever platform you are currently listening on. We have got so much content coming for 2026. I'm really, really excited. In particular, we are going to be diving into podcast website. We're going to be doing all the normal things, in terms of like how to start your show, how to grow your show, etc. But we are going to be diving into building your podcast website, building a blog to go with your podcast as well. So lots of blogging tips that are going to be coming. As I said, I've got over 7 years experience in that particular area. So I thought that would be a great way to go with the show, because it's all very well having a podcast, but a lot of podcasters also want a blog or a website to go with their podcast. So as I said, we're going to be diving into a lot of content about websites, podcast websites, and having a blog to go with your podcast in 2026 as well. So as I said, if you're not already subscribed, please subscribe to the show. I've mentioned the newsletter as well. If you head down to the show notes, there will be a link in the show notes to sign up to the newsletter so that you get my weekly newsletter, all of the goodness, reminding you of the new episode that's out, giving you some tips, etc. there. Otherwise, it's been great to spend time with you. Happy New Year. I almost forgot to say that as well. And I will see you next episode.